and for trying and punishing the thugs well. And then they can be doxed. Their personal addresses, ID number, and car plates can all be uploaded, causing great distress to the victims concerned. During the Black Cloud violence, the mutually assured destruction, people did not just dox the persons I just mentioned, even their family members easily became victims of doxing. So the people who they targeted at, or people who they did not agree with, became a subject of embarrassment. They may be forced to think that they had done something wrong, and they might have brought trouble on their own family members, and they might disappear from the cyber world altogether. And minors and younger, psychological stress, they might be forced to change the position and support mutually assault destruction, and then they might join the violent camp. Children or suicide. So doxing did not just target at political of public officers, or even media workers who were alleged who were accused of supporting the government. I think these people display double standards. When it comes to the contents of the bill, the bill will create offenses. The first tier offense is the elements of the first tier offense, any specified term is actually caused, then this second tier of offense may be liable on conviction on indictment to a fine of $1 million and imprisonment for 5 years. The administration also provided examples of similar legislation in Singapore, New Zealand, and Australia to show that the proofs and elements of crime with access. And as for personal data in various public registers in Hong Kong, they can easily be vulnerable to doxing. And the administration has asked the relevant departments to review the relevant searching arrangements and inspection arrangements. I support such improvement measures. I think the government has struck a balance in combating malicious doxing and protecting personal rights. Some members are concerned that the defense of legitimate journalistic activities might be abused by people who are very biased for the legal professional privilege was enacted based on court rulings. But if a 13-year-old child can claim to be a reporter and can, with the support of the Journalistic Association, cover such events on front line, and if various organizations are paying funding, these organizations to besiege China, and then they can then opt mutual destruction. I think members' concerns are valid. So I hope the judges presiding over such cases in the future can have more reasonable use doxing as a way to intimidate and threaten people who hold different political beliefs. Thank you.
Dr. Priscilla, Madam Deputy, the Personal Data Privacy Amendment on personal data and data subjects is entitled to access their own personal data. So it was a very useful ordinance. A form could be downloaded from the website of PCPD, and we managed to help a lot of people seeking help who did not manage to obtain their own personal data from their employers, etc. Members mentioned two incidents. First, the Octopus company sold the personal data of its users for commercial purposes. And the Octopus company sort of punished itself by donating $44 million. And after the Lehman Brothers incident, many investors received direct sales calls, and the disclaimer clauses were written in tiny words. So the font subsequently, it was stipulated that the font size must be legible and clear. I support these amendments, and I would point out the inadequacies. In 2017, 378,000 voters were lost, and the data held by the REO disappeared, and the relevant room in Asia World Expo did not have any CCTVs installed. The constituencies, the personal data of 8,000 voters disappeared. At that time, we wondered what happened to the personal data. So By 2019, we found that people who commit doxing managed to find out about the friends of a victim where the data of the 3.78 million voters back then if the Scotia camp does not like someone, then they can disclose the information of that person. Pacific lost the personal data of 9.4 million passengers, including myself. United Christian Hospital also lost the personal data of its patients, and TransUnion also lost credit information of its, and were such acts committed systematically or were only a tiny portion of the population targeted, let's say only 200,000, that person would solve the problem. Recently, a former clerical individuals, so we wonder whether it was an inside job. Perhaps they knew that they would not be caught by camera when accessing the information. The female staff member was arrested and found guilty on May the 22nd, 2019. A motion was moved to promote the use of technology in safeguarding personal data of the public. And personal data privacy is certainly related to doxing. For forums such as LHKG and HK Golden, information could be published rapidly, and dox information as well. I receive complaints in which some people were going after certain young people, and that could be detrimental to them. For police officers or certain high-profile figures who simply express their views, they would be doxed immediately. So it was very sad to see. As public figures, we are somewhat used to the pressure, but it is still unfair. We should be protected by the law. We are now playing catch up. The European Union passed the General Protection Regulations. It was passed in 2016, and there were detailed provisions on safety and ethics. For data providers and hosts, they are concerned about the bill. Specified harm refers to acts such as etc. Reference to the data subject and their family members is significant. So I prefer the current version. I believe the proposed amendments are very reasonable. If harm has been caused to the subject, then a fine at level 5 would be imposed. Facebook was slapped a fine of 160 million euros, and similarly for a case in the US, a hefty fine was imposed. I often tell the PCPD that they are a toothless tiger. That is why in my motion, I propose that they should have the power to prosecute as well as the power to impose administrative sanctions, apart from removing the content online without waiting for legal proceedings to finish or complete. I believe they can consider this going forward. I believe the commissioner can do even more, such that the case would not be taken to the DOJ every single time. The sooner the content is removed, the quicker we can minimize the harm on the data subject. Thank you. Mr. Holden Chow. Madam Deputy, I speak in support of the Personal Data Privacy Amendment Bill 2021. In combating doxing, many members have spoken, and we hope the government can properly tackle the acts of doxing by way of legislation. In 2019, during the Black Flag violence, the many cases of doxing have hurt many people, including public figures and also police officers, their relatives, and the ensuing intimidation, etc. I think such acts of cyber bullying were clear to see. The government has addressed the concerns of legislators by introducing the amendment bill. When we first discussed amending the ordinance to combat doxing at the Constitutional Affairs panel, the two-tier arrangement was not in place yet. If there's a clear intent, there will be maximum penalty, maximum imprisonment of 2 years. If actual harm could be proved, then there could be imprisonment for 5 years. At the panel on constitutional affairs, myself and many members believe that the two-tier system was needed. The original proposal was that actual harm must be proved before a case could be prosecuted. But members pointed out that it was not easy to prove the causing of actual harm. So it means that if actual harm could not be proved, the doxers could evade legal responsibility. The government has heeded the views of members, and in this amendment bill, they have introduced a two-tier system. Even if harm is yet to be proved, an offense could be proved, and I believe this is an appropriate arrangement. Without a two-tier system, we need to prove actual harm, and a lot of perpetrators would be let free. So I appreciate the government's decision to adopt our view. At the Bills Committee, many members offered valuable views. The proposed defense provided by the bill was too lax. That is, if a request is made for a platform to remove the contact, they could use a defense to excuse themselves from civil liability. But at the Bills Committee, members mentioned that the defense or immunity was too lax, and we saw that the government has heeded these views, and they will move an amendment. So by the time we reach committee stage, other members may speak on that. But we are glad to see that the government is amending the drafting of the bill based on members' views. In the future, the PCPD will be granted more. A few days ago, a former staff of the Immigration Department was found guilty of doxing, and a judgment was laid, but it was only the tip of an iceberg. We still see doxing on a widespread basis. So we need enough personnel for enforcement, or else even with the law in place, if the law enforcement agencies do not do a serious job, it would be hard to see the benefits of the law. So having an adequate level of manpower can help tackle cases of doxing, and I believe this is rather necessary. We support the Personal Data Privacy Amendment Bill 2021. Thank you.
Dr. Loy Kwok. Madam Deputy, I speak to support the Personal Data Privacy Amendment Bill 2021. Well, this bill aimed to combat the rapid surge in doxing by amending and create offenses for disclosing personal data without consent as to confer on the Commissioner for the Privacy Protection of Investigative and Enforcement Powers. According to the PDBO Cap 486, without the consent of the data subject and disclosing the personal data, and actually inflicted psychological damages, there will be the offense. The rapid surge in doxing activity, especially since the Black Rise in June 2019, a lot of the public officials, public figures, and the police officers were extensively doxed, and a lot of the personal data were widely circulating online. They received all kind of new harassment and subject treatment. For example, the children of the police officers were discriminated at schools and bullied, granted multiple interim injunctions to protect specific groups and individuals from doxing. As this is a civil remedy in nature, a breach of the injunctions will not leave the criminal records, and the CAT 486 does not have the intent of combating doxing, and the Privacy Commissioner and the police, while tracing the origins of the doxed content, are not able to confirm the identity of the data user that actually were obtained without the data subject consent. There was strong aspiration in the community in calling for crackdown. There's also imminent need to amend existing legislation in order to contain doxing behaviors. This bill was tabled to the council on July 21st, and a subcommittee was formed to study this bill. As a member of this bills committee, I see there are a few areas that are worth a discussion. As for the disclosure of personal data without consent, a two-tier offense was introduced. Tier 1 is a summary offense for disclosing personal data without the data subject's consent, or disclosure has intent to cause specified harm to the data subject or any family member, and also as well as being reckless, that will be guilty of first-tier offense. The sanction is set as level 6, $100,000 fine and 2 years imprisonment. For second tier is an indictable offense. Well, if this specific harm is actually caused to the data subject, that we found guilty. After indictment, it could be fined for $1 million and 5 years imprisonment. The specified harm, well, the harassment, molestation, pestering, threat, and intimidation are considered to be unspecified harm, or any property damages. According to the data provided by administration in UK and Australia and Singapore, the proposed penalties for doxing is similar for those proposed in this bill. Well, currently the Commission under the CAT 486 does not have any investigation or prosecution powers and was regarded as a toothless tiger. The criminal investigation are undertook by the police, while the Department of Justice handled prosecutions. This bill will empower the Commissioner with investigation and prosecution powers, and the Commissioner can prosecute on his own capacity. And some of the members were concerned whether the Commissioner office would have a sufficient manpower and the experience to handle the enforcement and prosecution work. The Commissioner replied that the office will apply for additional resources and hire suitable candidates and step up relevant training. And if necessary, the Commissioner shall take joint enforcement action with the police. The bill will empower the Commissioner to serve cessation notices to those who are capable of removing such dox contents. Well, hope to expedite the removal of the dox content in order to minimize the adverse impact to the data subject and the family members. While the proposed immunity clause that it was established that there was a risk of incurring a civil liability. It was not reasonable to expect the person to comply with such notice. Then it was served as the original defense. Some members doubted that this immunity being too wide in scope and will undermine the Commissioner's power to issue and the capability to enforce the cessation notice. The administration responded that it will move an amendment in the CSACH to remove such a provision and introduce a new immunity clause to protect the recipient of the cessation notice from potential civil liability arising from compliance with the cessation notice. All the Bills Committee support the second reading debate on this bill and support the administration's CSA amendments. Madam Deputy, in order to stop the tide of doxing, besides legislative amendments, the Commissioner's power to prosecute and enforcement should also step up with public education to promote the message of anti-doxing. We should target young people and children to promote the message of protecting the privacy of their own and the others, and to remind the relevant websites and the social platform operators to prevent their properties from being abused as tools for doxing or data privacy arrangement. And we should also set positive energy and boycott negative online behavior and learn to say no against doxing. In order to achieve a long-lasting solution, I so submit in support for the Personal Data Privacy Amendment Bill 2021. Next, Mr. Shenkin Po. I speak to support this bill. The object of this bill is to create offense for doxing to confer the Privacy Commissioner investigative and enforcement powers. Currently, the Commissioner has no power to crack down on doxing, can only write to the relevant website in asking them to remove the contents. Without legal powers, only 70% of the websites are willing to remove such the Commissioner is a toothless tiger, and we need to refer the police for any investigation and the DOJ for prosecutions. This is time-consuming and ineffective in cracking down on doxing. Upon passage of this bill, the Commissioner has the investigative and enforcement powers to act on their own to become a real tiger. Madam Deputy, doxing is a cowardly act in order to silence others and even threaten the personal safety of the data subjects. Their names, address, car license plate, and the particulars of the children were all put online. And they were openly bullied and even involved data theft for making bank loans, while the children were bullied at schools. The victims need to live in fear, and once posted online, it's impossible to completely remove this personal data, which will affect them for life. If they don't want their private personal data exposed, they would choose to silence themselves. Therefore, doxing itself is an act against freedom of speech and a despicable blackmail, and also become a tool for the rioters to counter the city voices. And the Commissioner has received over 5,800 cases related to doxing. Lots of targeting the law enforcement officers, judicial officers, and legislators. 1,400 out of those were referred to the police for investigate. 70 arrests were made and 2 convicted. From November 2019 to this April, 60 cases of breach of injunctions were referred to DOJ, 4 of which were convicted. Looking at the numbers, the doxing cases has now reached unreachable levels, and yet so few prosecutions were made. On Monday, a heavy penalty were given to an immigration department's employee for 45 months in prison. She logged into the computer system 45 times to obtain that while the defendant was served a safe sentence and was charged with misconduct in public office instead of charged with doxing. Criminalizing doxing is a must, and the bill also stipulates that the private can reach electronic devices and to stop, search, and arrest persons without warrants. Well, I will not go into the two-tier offense system. I see that is necessary. The level 1 offense, relatively minor. If the threshold is too high, will not be sufficient deterrent and simply for show only. And the commissioner planned to set up the investigation power team and plan to deploy resources from within. If necessary, they will hire those with criminal investigative experience to undertake such work. I believe that commissioner, despite his power, without experienced personnel, they will not make any arrest or prosecute anyone. That will render the law invalid. That the commissioner should directly hire experienced law enforcement officers, which the council is happy to approve the funding.
Mr. Ma Fung-kwok. Madam Deputy, I speak to support the Personal Data Privacy Amendment Bill 2021. The bill targets doxing acts, creates offenses for disclosing personal data without consent, and confer on the commissioner investigative and prosecution powers, and to enable the commissioner to serve cessation notices and to apply for injunctions. Yes, this amendment is long overdue, but better late than never. Myself and members of this council were victims of doxing. Our addresses and telephone numbers were disclosed. Our family members feared for our personal safety. It was hard to trace the disclosures. And then the social media platforms responsible were not taken into account. Recently, there was a case involving former clerical assistant of the Immigration Department. She leaked the private data of 215 individuals involving the government and the legislature, and she's now jailed. In fact, in the year before last, there were street violence caused by the anti-extradition protests, and violence spread to all sectors of society. There were doxing and a disclosure of personal data for the purpose of intimidation. From June 2019 to April this year, the commissioner has received over 5,700 complaints or has initiated investigations. 30% of the victims were police officers and their family members. Their ID numbers, addresses, and phone numbers were disclosed illegally without their consent. Before the enactment of the national security law, there were people who advocated killing family members and harm police officers, wives, and children online. In fact, the threshold for securing prosecution is a disclosure of information without consent. In fact, such information can easily go viral on the internet. It's difficult to trace the source of the disclosure, and it's hard for the commissioner to invoke Section 64 of the legislation to address these issues. The commissioner now has the power to ask for removal of doxing contents, but then his orders are not binding, and he has asked 18 platforms to remove 5,800 odd cases. But then as many of the requests were not acceded to, and the data is still spreading online. The commission has considered prosecuting more than 1,000 cases. Only 17 have been arrested and 2 convicted. So updating the current legislation to criminalize doxing behavior will be more effective for combating doxing. and bullying online. We've always urged the administration to consider how the ordinance can be amended to stop doxing acts. The amendment has introduced a two-tier structure. The first tier offense is a summary offense, and the second an indictable offense. The first is a disclosure of the personal data without the data subject's consent, and the second tier is, in addition to the elements of the first tier, specify harm caused to the data subject or his family members. And the section 64(2) is not amended. In addition to protecting the data subject, his family members are also protected to better reflect the gravity of such offenses. The disclosure will be punished, but if a platform refuses to remove the doxing contents, will also be criminally liable. In asking overseas platforms to remove such links, the commissioner has encountered difficulties because they are not in Hong Kong, and it's difficult for the commissioner to take action. In future, the commissioner will have extraterritorial power. The commissioner can require social media platform or providers to remove the links and also the doxing contents within a certain period of time. Violating that cessation order is an offense. Members are concerned as to how that extraterritorial power can be enforced. But so long as there is a legal backing for exercising the power, it will be more effective in the future. We've always asked that the commissioner has investigative and prosecution power to deal with criminal cases under the ordinance better, so that there is no need for referral of such cases to the police and the DOJ. The amendment has empowered the commissioner to investigate minor cases and to prosecute at magistrate courts, and then warrants can be given, and in case of emergency, the electronic devices can be accessed without a warrant, and the persons concerned can be arrested. This has greatly enhanced the enforcement efficiency and capability of the commissioner against doxing. For those who repeatedly breached Section 64 of the ordinance, the commissioner can apply for injunctions from the court to stop doxing acts that are taking place or about to take place as a preemptive measure. In addition to enacting the legislation and enforcement, there should be better online patrol and also public education. We should tell the public that doxing acts can be a criminal offense. We should let providers understand the new legislation so that social media platforms will not be abused for infringing personal data. And primary and secondary school children should be better educated on the seriousness of doxing. And it's quite common for people to share links on social media platforms. They should understand that such behavior carries risk, and we should make sure that doxing behavior will not take place in school campuses, leading to bullying of students. There should be extra resources for the commissioner to exercise his investigation power. Well, when personal data are weaponized, the impact on victims can be serious. Data subjects and their family members can be subject to nuisance and intimidation, and they can suffer psychological harm. Many people now cannot express their views openly for fear of doxing. This is not something that can be condoned in a civilized society. The administration should update our data protection legislation as soon as possible to catch up with technology which is developing by leaps and bounds. With these remarks, I support the second reading of the bill. Thank you. Mr. Christopher Zhang. Madam Deputy, I absolutely support the second reading of the Personal Data Privacy Amendment Bill 2021. With the amendments, I hope we can crack down on doxing violence so that people can no longer weaponize personal data online. Well, year before last, we had the anti-extradition row, and then people used doxing to intimidate people who held different political beliefs, and they used personal data of officials, police officers, and legislators. Such information was disclosed online, and legislators and police officers were harassed and felt rather intimidated, and even women and children were not spared. They targeted people who held different political beliefs, and the personal data of family members of the latter were also uploaded to the internet. Some rioters claimed that they would harass the young children of police officers, and so we must amend the Personal Data Privacy Ordinance so as to better safeguard people's personal data and crack down on doxing. Madam Deputy, the bill contains three things. First, to create offenses for disclosing personal data without consent. Second, to confer on the Commissioner investigative and prosecution powers. Third, to confer on the Commissioner the power to serve cessation notices. These amendments to tackle rampant doxing activities can effectively combat doxing activities. It will allow the Commissioner to investigate and prosecute doxing cases more expeditiously and efficiently. It can also stop the spread of doxing contents, and therefore I have every support for the proposals. The ordinance focus on protecting data subjects. With the amendment, even family members of data subjects are covered. So that they can be protected from the harm of doxing. I think this amendment is most reasonable and humane and is in line with the expectation of the public. The bill has also introduced a two-tier structure. So the first tier offense is disclosing personal data without the data subject's relevant consent, and the disclosure has an intent to cause specified harm, and a person who commits the first tier offense may be liable on conviction to a fine at level 6, i.e. $100,000 in imprisonment for 2 years. For the second tier of offense, once convicted, a person can be liable to a fine of $1 million in imprisonment for 5 years. Doxing has been so rampant because the cost of breaking the law is too low. Once we have created offenses under the bill, and with the introduction of a two-tier punishment structure, the bill will be more effective in deterring such crimes, and therefore I am 100% behind the bill. Section 66N of the bill is about a cessation order. Anyone who feels aggrieved to the cessation order can make an appeal to the magistrate, and during the appeal, the doxing content will still be stopped from dissemination. I think there's a strike balance between protecting people's rights and also the right to appeal. But the period for appeal is just 14 days, and there is no mention of the Municipal Services Appeal Board's arrangement. There is no deadline or period or time limit attached to MSAB. People have the feeling that the government is rather inefficient in dealing with complaints. People had the impression that the MSAB had been most inefficient. A simple complaint usually took a half year to a year to be processed. This has created a negative impact on or impression on the community. So if there is this clause in the bill to require MSAB to handle a certain complaint within a certain time frame, such as 1 month or 3 months, then I'm sure the bill will even have wider support from the community. Although the bill, even though the community generally supports the bill, I note that many people do not have sufficient understanding of the bill. Some are worried that the bill may affect freedom of the press and may curtail the rights of individuals. Some overseas media have recently kicked up fuss with this bill. They took things out of context, saying that overseas IT providers may pull out of Hong Kong as a result of the bill. That caused a concern in the community. Fortunately, the government clarified the matter with the organizations concerned, and therefore the concerns are now put to rest. I hope that the administration can clarify misinformation as soon as possible to avoid misreporting. With these remarks, I support the Personal Data Privacy Amendment Bill 2021.
唔該，代理主席。
Mr. Felix Chung, Madam Deputy. We support the Personal Data Privacy Amendment Bill 2021. In 2019, during the Black-clad violence, everyone from the pro-establishment camp were victims. Our addresses were published, and some people said they would do things near where we lived, so that was totally unacceptable. So we certainly support legislation against doxing. At the Bills Committee, we discussed a number of issues, but the government has not offered a full explanation. In the past, the PCPD would engage in administrative work, and now they are responsible for law enforcement. Do they have the experience and capability when it comes to enforcement? There could be conflicts or violent clashes. So what kind of people will they hire? The commissioner said they might hire retired police officers, retired discipline services officers, etc. So we are rather concerned. And we asked whether they could solicit help from the police. They did not offer a definite answer. if you suspect the presence of doxing information in some places or with some people, a warrant could be applied from the court. And but during certain exceptional circumstances, that action could be taken immediately. And in case of contingencies, there could be the element of danger. So is the PCPD capable of doing so? If certain information is published on platforms outside Hong Kong, according to the commissioner, 70% of the cases could be dealt with, and upon the issuance of letters, most platforms would take action. So in many cases, the disclosed information caused a lot of distress to the victims. The internet is boundless. You have to rely on overseas platforms, so not everything is in your hands, and you can only do what you could. In terms of arresting suspects, there were cases in the US in which a person refuses to unlock his computer or phone. It was an iPhone, and Apple refused to unlock the phone. And the court had to spend a very long time before the case could be dealt with. But yet the information has been published. So what kind of protection can we afford to the victims? So I hope the Secretary can offer some information. I believe this is a kind of loophole. A suspect might prohibit you from unlocking a phone or device using a prohibition order. And that would cause further harm to the data subject. At the Bills Committee, the government failed to address these questions properly, but all in all, the amendment bill can help tackle the offense of doxing, and hopefully it would create a deterrent effect so that people would stop weaponizing this tool. Mr. Peter Shield. Madam Deputy. Many legislators spoke on this bill since we were among the main victims during the Blacklat violence. One of my friends WhatsApped me one day. My friend showed me the addresses of all legislators, including myself and you, Madam Deputy. And our personal data were widely circulated, and on different platforms, people were talking about how they could reach us. So it was an intimidation tactic. They wanted us to shut up so that they were the only ones, they could be the only ones with a voice. So those with an opposite view would be muted. And with the promotion propaganda and Lennon walls, that was their strategy. So it was a Hong Kong version of the Color Revolution, and it was only one of the things they did. I fully support this bill. Discipline services and police officers were widely doxed in Saiwan Ho, someone tried to seize the pistol of a police officer, and the officer opened fire and subdued that suspect. And that afternoon, the personal information of the police officer were circulated online, including the particulars of his children. So all the frontline police officers were doxxed. I had a good friend who was a senior police officer. He asked me to help find a school for his child who was in primary school, since everyone in the school knew that his father was a police officer. So I called Miss Fong, the principal of Shekiang School, and she provided support immediately in accepting the son of my friend. My friend